The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Silverdale, Texas. As Zara Kincaid sat alone at the wooden table in her empty home, a single plate set before her, the food growing cold as the tears welled in her eyes. 6 months had passed since the influenza had taken her husband, but the ritual of setting his place remained, a stubborn hope against the finality of death that even she knew was foolish. Silverdale had boomed in the 1870s with the promise of silver. But by 1885, the mines had all but dried up, leaving behind a town struggling to redefine itself in the harsh reality of the western frontier. At 32, Zara had already lived several lifetimes of hardship, first losing her parents to a wagon accident when she was just 20, then marrying young to Harold Kincaid, who had promised her security, but delivered little before pneumonia claimed him after just 5 years of marriage. The knock at her door startled her from her memories. Visitors were rare these days. The townspeople had gradually stopped checking on the widow, their own struggles taking precedence. "Who is it?" she called, quickly wiping her eyes on her apron. "Xavier Foster, madam." "I've brought your supplies from Thornton's general store." Zara smoothed her simple blue dress and tucked a loose strand of auburn hair behind her ear before opening the door. The tall cowboy on her porch removed his hat, revealing sun-bleached brown hair and eyes that reminded her of the Clear Creek waters that ran through the hills beyond town. "Mrs. Kincaid," he nodded respectfully. "Mr. Thornton sent me with your monthly order. Said to tell you he threw in some extra coffee beans on account of you always paying on time." "That's kind of him," Zara replied, trying to compose herself, "and kind of you to deliver them. I wasn't expecting anything until tomorrow." Xavier shifted his weight, his spurs jingling softly. "Well, madam, I was heading this way anyhow. Got a new job at the Crawford Ranch just outside of town." She noticed the calluses on his hands as he passed her the packages, the way his shoulders filled out his worn cotton shirt. He wasn't like most of the cowboys who drifted through Silverdale. There was something steadier in his gaze, something that spoke of purpose, beyond the next cattle drive or card game. "You're welcome to set those on the table," she said, stepping aside to allow him entry. The propriety of inviting a strange man into her home occurred to her, but Silverdale wasn't so large that Xavier Foster was truly a stranger. She'd seen him around town, always respectful, always working. Xavier stepped inside, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. He placed the supplies on the sideboard, then turned and noticed the table with its 2-place settings, one clearly untouched. Understanding crossed his features, but he said nothing, merely nodding slightly as if acknowledging a private conversation between them. "Can I offer you some coffee, Mr. Foster?" "As you can see, I have plenty," Zara said, gesturing to the extra beans among her supplies. He hesitated, then smiled. "That's mighty kind, Mrs. Kincaid, but I should be getting back." Mr. Crawford isn't one to appreciate tardiness, even on the first day. "Of course," she replied, disappointed despite herself. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "Mrs. Kincaid, I wonder if you might know where I could find a decent room in town. The bunkhouse at Crawford's is full up with his regular hands, and the saloon rooms are a bit lively for my taste." Zara considered for a moment. The room above her barn had once housed a farmhand when her husband was alive. It had stood empty since. "I have a room," she said before she could think better of it. "Above the barn, it's simple but clean. I could use help with some repairs around the property. Perhaps we could come to an arrangement." Xavier studied her face, and Zara felt suddenly self-conscious about the offer. "What would people say about a widow taking in a male boarder? I'd pay fair rent, of course," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "And I'm handy with repairs. Your south fence looks like it could use some attention." Zara nodded. "It's been down since the spring storms. I haven't had the strength to fix it myself." "Then we have an agreement," Xavier said, extending his hand. As Zara shook it, the warmth of human contact after months of isolation nearly overwhelmed her. She withdrew her hand quickly, tucking it into her apron pocket. "I'll bring my things by tomorrow evening if that suits you," he said, placing his hat back on his head. "That would be fine, Mr. Foster." "Xavier, please," he said with a smile that reached his eyes. "Xavier," she repeated, the name feeling strange on her tongue. After he left, Zara sat back down at the table and stared at the empty plate across from her. For the first time in months, she cleared it away without ceremony, a small act that felt both like betrayal and liberation. The next evening, Xavier arrived with his modest belongings: a bedroll, a trunk, a saddle, and a rifle. Zara showed him to the room above the barn, which she had spent the day cleaning and preparing. The space was small but sufficient, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair by the window that overlooked the rolling hills beyond her property. "This will do just fine," Xavier said, setting down his trunk. "I appreciate your hospitality, Mrs. Kincaid." "Zara," she corrected him. "If I'm to call you Xavier, then you should call me Zara," he nodded. "Zara it is." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Xavier would rise before dawn to ride to the Crawford Ranch, returning in the evening to work on Zara's repairs until the light faded. She would cook supper, and they would eat together at her table. Their conversation initially awkward but gradually warming as they discovered common interests in books and music. Xavier, she learned, had come west from Pennsylvania after the war, working his way through Texas as a ranch hand, occasionally as a deputy when towns needed extra help. He'd never settled in one place for long, always moving on when the seasons changed or the work dried up. "Why Silverdale?" she asked one evening as they sat on her porch, the summer heat finally giving way to a cool breeze. "Heard Crawford was hiring," he said simply, "and I was tired of drifting." "So you plan to stay?" Xavier looked out at the horizon, where the last light of day painted the clouds pink and gold. "I reckon that depends on whether I find a reason to." Zara felt his gaze shift to her, and she kept her eyes deliberately on the sunset, afraid of what he might see in her face. It had been only 6 months since Harold's passing, yet she found herself looking forward to Xavier's return each evening, taking more care with her appearance, savoring their conversations in a way that made her feel both guilty and alive. The first time Xavier joined her in town for supplies, Zara was acutely aware of the glances and whispers that followed them. Mrs. Peterson, the banker's wife, approached them outside the general store. "Mrs. Kincaid," she said with a tight smile. "I haven't seen you at the church sewing circle in quite some time." "I've been busy with the house," Zara replied, aware of Xavier standing respectfully behind her. "Yes, I've heard you've taken in a boarder," Mrs. Peterson said, her eyes flicking to Xavier. "How progressive of you." Xavier stepped forward. "Mrs. Peterson, isn't it? I'm Xavier Foster. I've been helping Mrs. Kincaid with some repairs to her property. She's been kind enough to rent me a room above her barn." "I see," Mrs. Peterson replied, clearly not satisfied but unable to find fault with his polite explanation. "Well, Mrs. Kincaid, we do miss you at our gatherings. Perhaps you'll join us again soon." After she walked away, Xavier helped Zara load the supplies into her wagon. "I'm sorry if my presence is causing difficulties for you," he said quietly. "Don't be," Zara replied with more firmness than she felt. "What I do with my property is my business, not Mrs. Peterson's." Xavier smiled. "You're braver than you give yourself credit for." That night, as Zara prepared for bed, she caught herself humming a tune, something she hadn't done since before Harold fell ill. The realization stopped her cold. Was it disloyal to feel this contentment when her husband was barely cold in his grave? Yet Harold himself had told her in his final days not to mourn him too long to find happiness again if she could. "Life's too short for extended grieving, Zara," he'd said, his voice weak but his eyes clear. "Promise me you won't waste years waiting for permission to live again." She'd promised, but hadn't expected the opportunity to present itself so soon or in such an unexpected form as Xavier Foster. As August gave way to September, the work on Zara's property neared completion. The south fence stood strong again, the barn roof no longer leaked, and the well pump worked smoothly. Each improvement seemed to strengthen not just her homestead, but her resolve to move forward. One evening, as they sat at the table sharing a simple meal of stew and cornbread, Xavier cleared his throat. "Crawford's offered me a permanent position," he said, "as his foreman. His current man is moving to California to be with his daughter." "That's wonderful news," Zara said, trying to sound enthusiastic despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. A foreman would be expected to live on the ranch, not in a rented room above a widow's barn. "Yes, it's a good opportunity," Xavier agreed, studying his plate. "But it would mean moving to the ranch house." Zara nodded, focusing on cutting her cornbread into smaller and smaller pieces. "Of course, that makes perfect sense." They ate in silence for several minutes before Xavier spoke again. "Unless I had another reason to stay in town." Zara looked up, meeting his gaze. "What sort of reason?" Xavier set down his fork and took a deep breath. "Zara, I know it's only been a few months since we met, and I know you're still. That is, I understand if it's too soon, but I want you to know that I care for you, deeply." The words hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Zara's heart pounded in her chest. "I care for you too," she whispered, the admission both terrifying and liberating. "But Xavier, people will talk. They already do." "Let them," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I've never much cared what others think, only what's true." The touch of his hand on hers sent warmth through her body, awakening feelings she'd thought dormant. "And what is true, Xavier? That I'm falling in love with you, that I want to build a life here with you if you'll have me." Tears welled in Zara's eyes. "I don't know if I'm ready, I don't know if it's right." "We don't have to rush," he assured her, squeezing her hand gently. "I'll take the foreman's job, but I'll continue to pay rent for the room. We can court properly, give you time to be sure. I just needed you to know how I feel before I made any decisions." Relief and disappointment mingled in Zara's heart. Part of her wanted to throw caution to the winds, to embrace this unexpected chance at happiness without reservation. But the practical part, the part that had survived loss and hardship, knew that Xavier was right. They needed time. "I would like that," she said finally, "to court properly." Xavier's smile lit up his face, reaching his eyes in a way that made Zara's heart skip. "Then that's what we'll do." True to his word, Xavier moved to the Crawford Ranch but continued to rent the room above Zara's barn, using it when he came to town on weekends. They began to be seen together at church, at the general store, occasionally at the small restaurant that had opened on Main Street. The whispers continued but gradually changed in tone from scandal to acceptance. One Sunday after church, Reverend Walsh approached them as they stood talking with the Millers, a young couple who had recently moved to town. "Mrs. Kincaid, Mr. Foster," he greeted them warmly. "It's good to see you both becoming so involved in our community." "Thank you, Reverend," Xavier replied. "Silverdale is starting to feel like home." "I'm glad to hear it," the Reverend said. "In fact, I wanted to invite you both to our Harvest Festival Planning Committee. We could use some fresh ideas this year." Zara exchanged a glance with Xavier. "We'd be honored," she said, realizing as she spoke that she had answered for both of them, as a couple would. The Reverend seemed to notice it too, a slight smile crossing his face before he moved on to greet other parishioners. As they walked back to her house, Zara felt a newfound confidence. "Do you think people are starting to accept us?" she asked. "I think they're seeing what I've known all along," Xavier replied, offering her his arm. "That you're a remarkable woman who deserves happiness, however it comes to you." The Harvest Festival in October became a turning point in their relationship. As committee members, they spent long evenings planning decorations, coordinating food contributions, and organizing games for the children. Working together toward a common goal strengthened their bond in ways that simple courtship could not. The day of the festival dawned clear and crisp, perfect autumn weather. Zara wore her best dress, a deep burgundy that complemented her auburn hair, which she had arranged more carefully than usual. Xavier arrived early to escort her to the town square, handsome in a new shirt and vest, his hair neatly combed. "You look beautiful," he said when she opened the door, his admiration evident in his eyes. "And you are quite handsome," she replied, feeling a blush rise to her cheeks. The festival was a success. The town square transformed with bunting and lanterns, tables laden with food, music provided by local musicians. As dusk fell, Xavier led Zara away from the crowds toward the small gazebo at the edge of the square, now decorated with autumn leaves and candles. "I've been patient," he said, taking both her hands in his. "I've tried to give you the time you needed, but Zara, my feelings haven't changed. If anything, they've grown stronger." Zara's heart raced. "Mine too," she admitted. "I think about you all the time. When you're not here, the house feels empty again." "Then perhaps it's time we did something about that," Xavier said, reaching into his pocket. Zara's breath caught as he withdrew a small box. "Xavier." He opened it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She gave it to me before she died, told me to give it to the woman I wanted to spend my life with." Tears blurred Zara's vision as Xavier knelt before her. "Zara Kincaid, will you marry me? Will you let me come home to you every night, not as a boarder or a suitor, but as your husband?" The word yes formed on her lips immediately, but Zara paused, one last doubt nagging at her. "Are you sure, Xavier? I'm a widow, I've known loss. What if life is uncertain?" He finished for her. "It is, Zara. For everyone. I can't promise we won't face hardships, but I can promise to face them with you beside you for as long as I live." His words dispelled her fears like morning sun burning away fog. "Yes," she said, the simple word carrying all the certainty she felt. "Yes, I will marry you." Xavier slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and pulled her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, then deepening as they both gave themselves over to the feelings they'd held in check for so long. When they returned to the festival, hand in hand with Zara's ring catching the lantern light, their friends and neighbors offered congratulations without surprise. Somehow, everyone had seen what was coming before they had fully admitted it to themselves. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church, with the Millers as witnesses and Reverend Walsh officiating. Zara wore a new dress of pale blue, Xavier a dark suit with a matching blue tie. The simplicity of the ceremony belied the depth of feeling behind their vows, each word spoken with absolute conviction. That evening, as Xavier carried her across the threshold of what was now their home, Zara felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was not a betrayal of her past, but an honoring of her promise to Harold, to live fully again when the time came. Xavier set a plate at the table, then took her in his arms. "I've been waiting to do this for months," he murmured, kissing her with a passion that left her breathless. Later, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Zara traced the contours of his face with her fingertips. "What are you thinking?" Xavier asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "That sometimes life gives you exactly what you need, even when you didn't know to ask for it," she replied. "When you first knocked on my door, I was sitting at that table, staring at an empty plate, wondering how many more lonely meals I could endure. And now," he prompted, drawing her closer. "Now I'm wondering how many meals we'll share, how many memories we'll make, how many years we'll have together." "As many as life allows," Xavier promised. "Every single one precious." Winter came to Silverdale with unusual force that year, snow blanketing the town by early December. Xavier had taken on the role of foreman at Crawford's while also purchasing a small interest in the ranch, securing their financial future. Zara continued to manage their home, but had also begun teaching piano to several children in town, finding unexpected joy in sharing her love of music. On Christmas Eve, they hosted a small gathering for their closest friends, the Millers, Reverend Walsh, even Mrs. Peterson and her husband, whose initial disapproval had gradually transformed into grudging acceptance and finally genuine friendship. As their guests enjoyed the feast Zara had prepared, Xavier raised his glass in a toast. To new beginnings, to friendship, and to love that comes when we least expect it but most need it. "Hear, hear," echoed around the table as glasses clinked. Later, after their friends had departed and they sat before the fire, Xavier presented Zara with a small package. "Merry Christmas, my love." She unwrapped it to find a delicate silver locket. Inside was a tiny portrait of the two of them, painted by a traveling artist who had visited Silverdale in November. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Open the other side," Xavier urged. Zara did, finding a small inscription. "Every day a new beginning." She clutched the locket to her heart. "I love it, and I love you." "I have something for you too," she said, retrieving a package from beneath the tree. "Though it's not just from me." Xavier looked puzzled as he unwrapped the gift, a tiny pair of hand-knitted booties. He stared at them for a long moment before understanding dawned on his face. "Zara," he asked, his voice thick with emotion, "are you saying?" She nodded, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "In July, according to Dr. Thompson, we're going to have a baby." Xavier gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were made of the most precious material on earth. "A baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of their home and the promise of their future, Zara thought of how far they had come in less than a year. From a widow waiting alone at a table set for two, to a wife and soon-to-be mother creating a new family with a man who had entered her life carrying groceries and stayed to rebuild her heart. Life on the frontier was never easy. There would be hardships ahead, challenges to face together. But as Xavier kissed her tenderly, his hand still resting protectively over their unborn child, Zara knew with absolute certainty that whatever came, they would face it together, stronger for having found each other. The following July, as promised, their daughter arrived, Elizabeth Rose Foster, named for Xavier's mother and Zara's. She had her father's clear eyes and her mother's determined spirit, evident from her first lusty cries. Xavier held her with trembling hands, awe written across his face as he counted 10 perfect fingers and 10 perfect toes. "She's a miracle," he whispered to Zara, who lay exhausted but radiant after the long labor. "You both are." As Elizabeth grew, so did their family. A son, James, joined them 2 years later, followed by twin girls, Sarah and Rebecca, in 1892. The small house that had once echoed with Zara's solitude now overflowed with the chaos and joy of family life. Xavier's investment in Crawford's ranch paid dividends as Silverdale transformed from a failed mining town into a prosperous cattle community. By the turn of the century, they had built a larger home on the edge of town, with a proper music room where Zara taught piano to a growing number of students, and their children learned to play. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Zara back to the gazebo where he had proposed, now weathered but still standing in the town square. He presented her with a journal bound in soft leather. "What's this?" she asked, opening it to find his handwriting filling the pages. "I started writing it the day after we met," he explained. "Every night I wrote down one thing about you that made me fall more in love." Zara thumbed through the pages, tears forming as she read random entries. The way she hums while kneading bread. How she always stands up for what she believes is right. The sound of her laughter when Elizabeth said her first word. "There are thousands of entries," she said in wonder, "and thousands more to come," Xavier promised, taking her hand. The years had added lines to their faces, silver threads to their hair, but when their eyes met, Zara felt the same rush of feeling as when he had first taken her hand across the dinner table. "You ever think about how differently our lives might have turned out?" she asked. "If Mr. Thornton hadn't sent you with my supplies that day," Xavier shook his head. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be, Zara." As they walked home hand in hand, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the depths of grief to the heights of joy, from solitude to the rich tapestry of family life they had created together. That night, after the children were asleep, Xavier and Zara sat at their table, the same one where she had once kept lonely vigil with an empty plate. Now it was surrounded by chairs for their growing family, marked with the nicks and scratches of daily use, bearing witness to thousands of shared meals and conversations. Xavier reached across the table and took her hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years yet never lost its power to connect them. 15 years, he said softly, and I love you more today than I did then. As I love you, Zara replied, squeezing his hand. More with each passing day. In the quiet of their home, with the future stretching before them like an open road, Zara knew that this was what it meant to truly live again after loss, not to forget the past, but to build upon it, to create something new and beautiful from the foundations of what came before. The widow who had waited alone at the table and the cowboy who had set down his heart alongside a plate of food had found in each other not just love, but home, the surest shelter against life's storms, the warmest haven for life's joys. And in that home, they would continue to write their story day by day, year by year, for as long as life allowed.